Hi, I'm Pierce Brosnan. I'd like to talk about some of the roles that I've played in my life.
He has been called too old, too soft, too far past his prime to matter anymore. For years, people whispered that Pierce Brosnan's best days were behind him, that he was just another former Bond fading quietly into irrelevance. But right now, in the middle of 2026, something strange is happening. He is everywhere. New films, new deals, a hit streaming show, and a fresh casting announcement that dropped just this week. So is the story really that things aren't looking good for Pierce Brosnan? Or is it that the people writing him off never understood what they were watching in the first place? Stay with me because this story does not go the way you think it does. To understand why Pierce Brosnan keeps coming back, you have to understand how much he has already lost. He was born in May 1953 in a small town in County Meath, Ireland, into a childhood built almost entirely around absence. His father left before he could form a single memory of him. His mother had to leave too, crossing the sea to England to find work, the way so many Irish parents of that generation were forced to do. So a young Pierce grew up being passed between relatives, staying in other people's homes, seeing his own mother only on occasional visits. Long before he ever wore a tuxedo on screen, he learned what it felt like to be the outsider standing just past the edge of the room. As a teenager, he moved to London and enrolled at drama school, slowly working his way into an acting career the hard way, through small roles and long stretches of uncertainty. By the early 1980s, persistence started to pay off. He landed the lead in a television series called Remington Steele, playing a charming, quick-witted con man posing as a detective. The show made him a recognizable face for the first time in his life, and it caught the attention of people who mattered a great deal in the movie business. In 1986, with Roger Moore stepping away from the role of James Bond, the producers went looking for their next 007. Brosnan was the name everyone kept landing on. He flew to London for a screen test. He was fitted for a tuxedo. He reportedly stood on the actual 007 soundstage at Pinewood Studios, close enough to the role that people around him were already treating it as settled. Then, at almost the last possible moment, it fell apart. Word had leaked that Brosnan was the frontrunner for Bond, and the publicity gave a ratings boost to Remington Steele, a show the network had already been planning to cancel. Under a contract clause, the network reversed course and picked the series back up, which meant Brosnan was legally bound to it. The Bond role went to Timothy Dalton instead. Brosnan later described it as one of the harder blows of his career, a role he had all but held in his hands, gone because of a technicality attached to a show that was supposed to be ending anyway. The years that followed were not empty ones. He kept working steadily, appearing in a run of films that were solid without being defining, including a memorable turn as the smooth, slightly suspicious husband in Mrs. Doubtfire. But nothing broke through in the way that first almost Bond moment had promised. Then, in 1995, 9 years after the role first slipped away from him, it finally arrived. GoldenEye brought Brosnan into the tuxedo as the sixth actor to play James Bond, and it was an enormous success, pulling in over $350 million worldwide and becoming, at that point, the highest-grossing Bond film ever made. The wait had been long and painful, but it looked, finally, like the story had corrected itself. For the next 7 years, Brosnan was Bond. 4 films: GoldenEye in 1995, Tomorrow Never Dies in 1997, The World Is Not Enough in 1999, and Die Another Day in 2002. His salary climbed with every outing, starting around $4 million for his first film and rising past $16 million by his last. Die Another Day became the highest-grossing Bond film in the franchise's history at the time of its release, built as a lavish 40th anniversary celebration of the character. But behind the box office numbers, cracks were showing. Critics were increasingly unkind, pointing to shaky visual effects and a plot that leaned on ideas many viewers found simply too far-fetched for a series that had always prided itself on a certain grounded coolness. It remains, to this day, the lowest-reviewed film of his run as Bond. Brosnan went into the press tour for that film believing a 5th outing was already being planned. The producers had spoken warmly about his future in the role. Then came a phone call that he has talked about many times since, one of those moments people replay in their minds for years afterward. He was in the Bahamas working on another project when his agents reached him and told him the producers wanted to speak to him directly. What followed, by his own account, was a short and devastating conversation, ending with the news that he would not be returning as Bond. He has described feeling blindsided, almost discarded, after 7 years of carrying one of the most recognizable characters in cinema. In 2005, Daniel Craig was announced as his replacement. The role had now been taken from Brosnan twice in one lifetime, once by a legal technicality before it ever really began, and once by a phone call after he had already given it everything he had. What he did next says a great deal about who he actually is as an actor. Instead of trying to ease his way out of the shadow of Bond, he ran straight at it. In 2005, he took the lead in a small independent film called The Matador, playing a burned-out, foul-mouthed, emotionally collapsing hitman with a bad haircut and none of the polished audiences associated with him. It was a deliberate act of image demolition, and it worked. The performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination, only the second nomination of his entire career, and critics who had spent years associating him purely with tuxedos and gadgets suddenly had to reckon with an actor willing to look foolish, desperate, and human on screen. It was proof that the parts asking him to step furthest away from Bond were often the ones that revealed the most about what he could actually do. Even with that critical reset, the decade that followed was a strange, quiet stretch. He never disappeared exactly, but he was not exactly the center of the conversation either. Audiences mostly remember him from Mamma Mia in 2008, belting out ABBA songs on a sun-drenched Greek island, a film that made an enormous amount of money but also turned his singing into an ongoing joke that followed him for years. There were competent action thrillers that came and went without leaving much of a mark. There was a 2-season Western drama where he played a Texas oil patriarch, ambitious work that never found the audience it deserved. There was a turn opposite Jackie Chan as a former IRA commander, a role with real edge that most casual viewers simply never noticed. He was, in industry terms, a working actor rather than a wanted one, someone reliably employed but not someone the whole business was chasing after. What almost nobody outside his closest circle fully understood at the time was what he was carrying while all of that was happening. In December 1991, Brosnan lost his first wife, the actress Cassandra Harris, to ovarian cancer. She was 43 years old, and she died the day after their wedding anniversary. After 4 years of surgeries and chemotherapy that Brosnan stayed beside her through until the very end. She had been the person, by his own account, who shaped him into the man, the actor, and the father he became. Cassandra's own mother had died of the same disease, so she had gone into her diagnosis already understanding exactly what she was facing. Then, in June 2013, the same disease returned in a way that is almost unbearable to sit with. Brosnan's daughter, Charlotte, whom he had adopted and raised alongside her brother after their biological father passed away, died of ovarian cancer at 41, after a 3-year fight, surrounded by her husband, her children, and her brothers. The illness that had taken her mother had now taken her too. Brosnan has spoken about carrying what he calls a dark companion beside him ever since, a phrase that does not sound like someone passing through a season of grief, so much as someone who has learned to live permanently alongside it. In the years since, he has become a visible advocate for ovarian cancer research and awareness, using the reach his career gave him to push for funding and attention toward the disease that took 2 of the people closest to him. It is worth sitting with that for a second because it reframes everything else. All those steady, unremarkable film roles through the 2010s were happening while he was carrying one of the heaviest kinds of grief a person can carry twice over. Which brings us to now, to the actual reason people are suddenly talking about Pierce Brosnan again, and why the framing of bad news does not really hold up once you look at what has actually happened. The turn began quietly, almost by accident, with a small crime film called Fast Charlie. It opened in theaters in December 2023 to almost no attention at all, grossing something in the neighborhood of $260,000, a number so small it barely registers in industry terms. Brosnan played a veteran mob fixer hunting down the rival who killed his closest friend, in what turned out to be one of the final screen performances from the legendary actor James Caan before his passing. The film quietly moved to home streaming and seemed destined to be forgotten entirely. Then, in June 2026, Netflix picked it up, and something unexpected happened. In a single week it climbed onto Netflix's global top 10 movies list, reaching as high as number 5 worldwide with millions of views and millions of hours watched. And it landed in the US top 10 as well, climbing all the way to number 2. A film that had made barely $250,000 in theaters was suddenly one of the most watched titles on the largest streaming service in the world. It turned out the appetite for Brosnan had never gone anywhere. What had been missing was simply the right platform putting the work in front of people at the right moment. Around the same time, an even bigger shift was already underway. In March 2025, a 10-episode crime series called MobLand premiered, created by Ronan Bennett with Guy Ritchie directing several episodes, centered on 2 warring London crime families locked in a brutal fight for control. Brosnan played the family patriarch, a role built entirely on quiet menace rather than charm. A man who holds power by staying calm while everything around him threatens to explode. Sharing scenes with Tom Hardy and Helen Mirren, both actors known for commanding a screen on their own, Brosnan more than held his ground, bringing something colder and more settled than either of them, and it gave the show a huge amount of its tension. By the middle of 2025, the series had reached more than 26 million viewers worldwide, making it one of the most watched original shows in its platform's history, and it was renewed for a second season within weeks of the finale, with Brosnan, Hardy, and Mirren all confirmed to return. That is not a stray late-career credit. That is a genuine hit, built on a version of Brosnan that most audiences had simply never been given the chance to see before. Then came Giant, a film telling the story of the boxer Prince Nassim Hamed, produced by Sylvester Stallone. Brosnan played Brendan Ingle, the Irish trainer who discovered a 7-year-old Hamed in a Sheffield church hall and shaped him into a world champion. For this role, Brosnan underwent a genuine physical transformation, spending hours a day in makeup with a bald cap and prosthetic work so extensive that he later said plainly that he no longer resembled himself on screen. That is not the choice of an actor coasting on name recognition. That is the choice of someone chasing something he still cares about getting right. The film premiered at the BFI London Film Festival before opening in UK cinemas in January 2026. And the momentum has not slowed down since. Cliffhanger, a reimagining of the classic survival thriller, is set to open in theaters on August 28, 2026, with Brosnan starring as a veteran mountaineer whose family is torn apart by a kidnapping plot in a remote alpine chalet. The project was acquired in a significant 8-figure deal out of the Toronto International Film Festival, with a sequel reportedly already in development before the first film has even reached audiences. A strong signal of how much confidence the industry is placing in him right now. And just this week, in mid-August 2026, it was announced that Brosnan is joining the cast of Extraction 3, the Netflix action franchise built around Chris Hemsworth, alongside a lineup of other action veterans. At an age when plenty of actors are winding down, Brosnan is being handed some of the biggest, highest-profile projects of his entire career. So when you put it all together, the honest picture looks almost nothing like the ominous headline it sometimes gets dressed up as. This is a man who lost the role that was supposed to define his life, not once but twice, first to a contract clause and then to a phone call in the Bahamas. This is a man who buried his wife and, more than 20 years later, buried his daughter to the exact same disease, and turned that grief into advocacy instead of letting it swallow him. This is a man who spent a decade being politely overlooked by an industry that had already decided it knew what he was capable of, only to prove, film by film and role by role, that it never really did. At 73, Pierce Brosnan is not clinging to old fame. He is building something new on top of everything he survived, and if that is what people mean when they say the news is not looking good for him, then it might be worth asking what exactly they were expecting instead. Because from where things actually stand right now, this looks a lot less like decline, and a lot more like one of the strongest chapters he has ever had.